Joining us this week for the Wednesday Bookmark is Keisha Blair. Keisha is a Harvard-trained policy expert and highly successful economist. She's the founder of the Keisha Blair Institute on Holistic Wealth and host of the Holistic Wealth podcast. She lives right here in Ottawa. We're going to talk this morning about her book, Holistic Wealth, 36 life lessons to help you recover from disruption, find your life purpose, and achieve financial freedom. Keisha, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brock. It's good to be here.
Keisha, I hate to begin on such a heavy note. I really do. But early on in the book, you talk about your husband's very sudden and shocking passing. At the time, you'd only been married for 7 years. You had a 3-year-old and an 8-week-old. Take us back to that horrible day of April 8th. What happened that day?
Yeah, so he had gone to work. Everything was fine. He worked at Hydro Ottawa and he came home after work. We sat down to dinner and he just suddenly started complaining about a pain in his side. And I remember thinking, wow, this is just happening so suddenly. And he said, call the ambulance. And I said, what? Really? What's going on? He said, just call the ambulance. Just call the ambulance right now. And I did. And the ambulance came and, they checked his vitals, his blood pressure. And I remember his blood pressure being like 170 over 90. It was very high. It was actually sending off an alarm on their machine. And so they drove him to the Queensway Carleton Hospital. And within 3 hours, he was gone.
Wow.
And it was unbelievable because the doctors didn't even get time to really diagnose, to really properly get a sense of what was going on. By the end of, the night, we knew he had some form of internal bleeding. So he died on the CT scan machine. And I remember sitting there with nurses rushing past me with bags of blood to try to give him a blood transfusion because he had lost so much blood. And they called me in after the resuscitation attempts failed. They called me in the room and said, they called the time of death and said, we're sorry, he's gone. And you can imagine having just given birth 8 weeks prior to your second child. And I had another 3-year-old. So I had 2 young boys and he had no pre-existing illnesses, nothing that we knew of. He was fit. He ran the marathons that we normally have in May, the Ottawa Marathon. He was very active, very healthy, and took care of himself. So we were all in shock. I was in shock. I was just recovering from childbirth. And it was a very horrible, tragic thing to go through.
I cannot even imagine. In your section on intentional life purpose, you put out the challenge to be a detour conqueror. And I thought that was such an interesting way of phrasing things. A detour conqueror. What is a detour conqueror?
Yeah, I feel like when that happened to me, Brock, I was set on a detour. It was not the path that I thought I would take in life. I thought, for sure we would settle down, raise our kids, be grandparents, watch our kids grow up and our grandkids. But my life took a detour. And the detour was not just, the grief from the death and the fallout. It was also, life happenings like my career and having to put that on hold to take care of my 2 young kids as a single mom now. It had to do with, finances. It had to do with my spiritual life. I had questioned, like, why is this happening now? And so that detour that I spoke of in the book and being a detour conqueror is using, all those aspects of holistic wealth to really conquer those detours. And I feel like, with God as the center of that, we can do that because that is his promise to us. But I feel like so much of us feel like victims when this happens, and it's normal and it's natural, right? To feel like, wow, I'm such a victim. Look at me. I'm here with 2 young kids and no father. And this is happening. I know my career is taking a setback. How am I ever going to do this alone? Which, of course, all of that passed through my mind. But when I went through the paces of, examining that detour using biblical concepts, using other financial concepts that I had learned as an economist, I realized that we are conquerors. And I realized that we are, blessed with that from the very beginning. It's not something that we have to earn. It's not something that we have to work at. We are, because we're given that through God,
Mm.
because he had conquered the grave. And because he had conquered the grave, we're already conquerors. And yes, we're going to get that detour. We're going to get many detours probably in life. But how do we use that to become conquerors and to become detour conquerors? And I think he has given us that with his word and with his promise that he has planned everything in advance for us. And he has really covered all of that. He sees the bigger picture. He knew us from before birth. He knew this was going to happen. So we're already conquerors. And it's so funny that, so much of us, we get up like my dad passed away last week, actually, Brock.
Oh.
And I'm in that grief stage again of mourning. And every single day I get up, even this morning, and I thought, I was dropping my daughter to school and driving on Maryvale, and I thought, wow, my dad's gone. He's no longer here.
Oh,
And then I
Keisha.
remembered the concepts in the book about spiritual renewal and renewing my hope and motivation. And I said, yes, we're already conquerors. This is something I can absolutely do because I know that he has promised that.
Gosh. Uh, let's touch on financial independence, because that's a big part of the book. And obviously, even in that sense, huge hit, unexpected hit when your husband passed away financially, even. You encourage us all to work out our personal financial identity, is how you phrase it. What is a personal financial identity?
Yeah, so I remember going through the paces, and even as a trained economist,
Hmm.
thinking, what would he do? What would he spend this on? How should I spend this? Would he like it if did this purchase or this investment? And I kept doing that. And I thought to myself, why am I going through these paces? It's because I lack that confidence. And then I remember coming up with this framework, the financial identity framework, which
Hmm.
I talk about. And, women were asking me for a quiz that they could use to find their financial identity. And so I drafted that and I put that out there. And what it really does is to really help you embrace who you are financially. So I'm a risk taker. But even though I went through that setback, even though as a risk taker, I still questioned everything. I wasn't embracing who I was. I was trying to live in his footsteps as a minimalist, because he was a minimalist.
Mm-hmm.
But what that financial identity framework allows you to do is to step into that, who you are financially, and own it, the strengths and weaknesses that come with it, and really take those steps in your life to empower yourself financially. So that's what I had to do. And that's what it empowered me to do as a risk taker, because I was widowed so young. I still needed to be able to look after my finances, to
Mm-hmm.
make bold and, good financial moves for me and the kids. And that's what it enabled me to do. It was like, you know what, embrace the strengths of that and step out there with courage and with bravery and really own your finances. And that's what it allows you to do. Whether you're a minimalist, a risk taker, an anxious spender, it doesn't matter. It's all about embracing the strengths and trying to minimize the weaknesses to really gain financial freedom.
Hmm. And I think in part because of what you've been through, you have so much wisdom to share now. And I just appreciate you sharing it in this book. There are a lot of these life lessons we're not even going to touch on, but let's close with this one, because you talk about the art of saying no, and living a life true to oneself requires mastering the art of saying no. How do we get better in life at knowing how and where to say no?
Yeah, absolutely. I found that when I went through grief, and even now that I'm going through this with, the death of my father
Mm-hmm.
again, saying no has come to the forefront again, as we have to prioritize, right? What we do with our bodies, what we do with our time, where we go, and who we spend time with. And I think even as we think about our own lives and our kids, that art of saying no to things that don't enrich our lives, to things that don't bring us with deeper connection to God, with things that don't bring us deeper connection to family, especially in this point in life when I think even globally, right, we're going through so much, that art of saying no can mean the difference between whether we just barely survive in life or whether we can thrive and grow and become the person that God wants us to become. and to live that life purpose that we were meant for, which I talk about a lot in the book too. And saying no, I know a lot of people think saying yes is going to definitely be that road to getting there, but actually saying no and saying,
Yeah.
could be more effective in basically narrowing down our focus to actually get there. So I think that's a really important part of the book, Brock, for people to tune into as well.
So true. Well, we've only touched on maybe 3 or 4, but there are 36 life lessons to help you recover from disruption, find your life purpose, and achieve financial freedom. There is so much wisdom in every chapter of this book. Again, the book we've been talking about is called Holistic Wealth. Keisha Blair, Ottawa's own, our guest this week for the Wednesday Bookmark. I loved the book. Thanks so much for your time this morning, Keisha.
Thanks so much, Brock. Thank you for having me.